You're going to remove the exhaust can. Two springs holding it to the pipe. We've got a 10mm head bolt straight down behind holding it to the frame with a spring. And this is on the stock can or an aftermarket can. The fasteners are the same. Aftermarket can being a little easier to see what you're doing. So that's the fastener at the back. And unplug the exhaust temp sensor, and we'll just leave it in the exhaust can and slide it out of there. Alright, so moving in for the Chaincase cover. Got all the fasteners around the case removed already, with the exception of one. I have the ultracapacitor. This one has shot. This is ultracapacitor is unplugged, and the speed sensor is unplugged. Got one bolt in here, holds the floorboard support to the Chaincase cover, and I loosened it already to drain the oil, so let it loose. The oil's already drained out of it. So I just got to remove the one last bolt. So going around, all these are a T30 Torx with a T40 gear here and a 10mm head bolt right at the bottom. Now you can rotate the cover and remove it. Around on the other side here, we have 3 10mm head nuts here, here, and in front of the caliper. Then we have one T30 Torx bolt going down. That'll let us remove the break this cover. So you'll have to rotate the track to gain access to the 4 T40 Torx bolts that hold the caliper stay and bearing support onto the tunnel here. Alright, so Ski-Doo has a tool to hook into this and pull it off the bearing. Most of them aren't on too tight. I do is tape up a bar so you're not causing any scratches. But what's really important is that you don't get it crooked. Okay, so you're just going to do a little bit back and forth, and it's a little bit of a slow process, but it'll go back and forth. And if everything gets really tight, then you know you're getting it crooked. But you can see, if you just take your time, it's coming off very easily. A lot of times people try and pry really, really hard on one end, just get the bearing wedged in there, and then you can't move it from that. Okay, so from there, you can actually do it by hand. Slide the brake line up, And the whole caliper with rotor comes out just like that. Okay, you can separate the pads a little bit, take the rotor out. Here we have the bearing that slides into the back side of the caliper support. So you can see what you're doing. You're sliding the support off the bearing. And even this one's fairly rusty. It still came off a piece of cake. If you get it crooked, you're going to bind up, you're going to cause yourself problems. Go ahead and loosen the track tension, or the chain tension. That's a T25 Torx as well. Remove the snap ring from this side as well. You have it. And slide the sprocket off the drive axle. Okay, we're going to work on removing the rear skid now. So, rear suspension is held in with 4 bolts. 2 at the back, 2 at the front. Now, this is, in my opinion, an impact job. I don't know of a good way of doing it without an impact, but these bolts are threaded into a round rod that is freely rotating through the suspension, so they're both threaded into the same rod. So a lot of time, and they do have Loctite on them. So if you're just trying to loosen them off, that rod's going to start turning. There's nothing you can do about it. So what I do is I leave one bolt tight, I take the other one all the way out. Take it over to the wire brush all the Loctite off, put it back in, and snug it up. And then we're going to take this side out, leave it out, and then just with the impact being quick, you should be able to get the other side out. So we'll see how it goes. So this one's out of the threads. Now this side I've already taken apart, cleaned the Loctite off the threads. Now you can see that it's come loose, and now the rod is spinning. So typically with an impact you can just keep zipping it like that and it will come out. Note it comes. Now if we didn't take the Loctite off this, that wouldn't happen. You would just get it loose, you'd have to put the bolts back in, tighten them back up. And of course, before you do this, you need something holding the back of the sled up. So this one, on the front, I've taken it out. Clean the Loctite off, and we'll zip it back in. Okay, I'm not going crazy tight. I'm going to go remove the other side. Alright, piece of cake. Okay, so rear suspension is unbolted now. So I'm going to step out of the way. It's a little bit of a pain because my bench isn't as long as the track. But now you can see everything is loose. Lift it up a little bit more. I'm going to work the suspension under the track. we're going to go about removing the drive axle. So we've gotten the caliper mount off, we've gotten the sprocket off the other side, and that's what holds it in. So now we can remove the axle. So what we have to do is get some slack in the track here. And get the track kind of off the drivers. And you can slide the drive shaft over to the brake side. You can get the drive axle out. Things going in with the new track is direction arrows, of course. Make sure you're putting it on there, right? Now when the track they come wrapped very tight, and there's always a very tight kink in it. So make sure you're not dealing with the kink right up where you're trying to install the drive axle. That'll just make it more and more difficult than it needs to be. Slide this into place. You can just kind of roll the track so that it holds itself up for you. Something like that. So we're making ourselves a nice little pocket here. Go ahead and slide the drive axle back in here. Backing plate on the axle, and it's got a cutout for this hole and two little tabs, so you're going to slide it in the tunnel and rotate it. And that's actually what your caliper bolts bolt into and sandwich this bearing. Right here you can see the tabs for that plate. Okay, you slide them in, you can see the cutouts there, and you turn them into place and the whole bolt holes line up. Okay, we're going to start going back together here. Good idea to clean up the bearing while you have it out, and put a little bit of anti-seize on the bearing, or same thing, I cleaned this up a little bit with, I just used the wire brush, but you use a wire brush or Scotch-Brite. Slide our brake rotor back into place. Going back on with that again, we're just trying to make sure that it goes nice and straight. We don't want to bind anything, and things will go easy for you. And once you get it as far as you can by hand, go ahead and put the bolts back in and just tighten it in a nice even pattern here. So grab our 4 bolts. I'm going to put a little bit of blue medium strength thread locker on them. We'll go ahead and put the snap ring back on. And snap rings actually are stamped when they're manufactured. So there's a sharp edge and a rounded edge. So you always want the sharp edge away, or sharp edge away from any kind of force. So in this case, the rotor you can't go that way, it could only come off in this way, so you'd want the sharp edge out. Make sure that it's in the groove nicely. From here we can just put the cover back on. Blue thread lock on these bolts as well. My favorite way for the back is to set the brake. You just take the bar in one of the track windows and you can pry the head that way. And I still have to come down a little bit. Makes it a piece of cake. Alright, going back together on the Chaincase side. Snap ring, sharp that out. tension the chain whether you can see it. Go ahead and slide the cover back on. Ski-Doo's Chaincase oil, synthetic Chaincase oil. They have mineral and synthetic. Alright, I've slid the top back into place here. Paying attention, there are tabs right here that slide in. You're going to get those ones in first. And then up at the back, and make sure that these ones are slid in. Otherwise you have a big gap at the console so you can see when you're going on with it. There's holes in little tabs that drop in right in under here. And then the whole thing slides back. Now the most important thing to do is make sure that this boot is on and tighten the clamp up. For that, you're installing the screws with the washers here in this location, without washers here, and then the two beside the dash. Okay, we've got the new track installed and tensioned and aligned. Now, being brand new, I'll go a little bit tighter than normal, as it will stretch in. Again, it comes all kinked up and stuff. But for your tension, you're wanting it to move down right at the bump stop, about 3.25 centimeters, 3.2 centimeters, with about 15 pounds of force. Okay, and that's going to be a measurement from the bottom of the slider here down to where you can press the track. So you should see about that much movement with about 15 pounds of force. Okay, that's the spec. Alignment, you're going to look, and what you're going to do is you're going to spin the track up, let it come to a rest, and see what kind of spacing you have between the clips and the slider on both sides, and you want that to be centered. And usually what you want to be watching for is right up where the track comes in. This thing's got some aftermarket brackets here, but this distance here between the track and the drop bracket on both sides should be equal. Okay, and this is very important, especially with the T-motion sleds, because the bottom can move. Okay, when you're actually riding it, the bottom's going to move a little bit, but what we want is when weight's off, everything is running straight and true up into the tunnel. Okay. Adjusting, of course, is done. The two adjust screws here, and you do have to loosen the axle off and tighten it back up to 18 foot-pounds. And it is a bolt all the way through with a nut on the other side. And that's that. Alright, thanks for watching this video on track exchange on the Ski-Doo 850. So that's anything in the G4 chassis, Rev-xu. If I left any questions that you have, please let me know. I'll do my best to answer them. Thanks again.